The first time I saw the two tiny heartbeats flicker on that screen, I felt my entire world shift. It wasn't just the joy of knowing we were having twins. It was the realization that life had entrusted me with a love so fragile, so pure, it could break or heal me completely. I remember gripping the edge of the examination table, my palms sweaty, my heart hammering in a rhythm that matched the tiny lives on the monitor. I couldn't stop smiling, even as tears rolled down my cheeks. Life felt full, heavy with hope, and I was ready to embrace it all. But by the end of that week, hope had become tangled in confusion, and joy had turned into a secret I didn't know how to protect. My name is Emily, and I never thought motherhood would start with betrayal. My husband, Daniel, is a quiet, steady man, kind, reliable, the sort of person whose calm voice could make the world feel safe. I trusted him with everything. We had been married 5 years, and while life wasn't perfect, it had a rhythm I had learned to love. Daniel had a sister, Claire, and a mother, Margaret, who seemed sweet from the outside, always offering advice and homemade cookies, but I never realized just how complicated family loyalty could be until this moment. I still remember the morning I shared my pregnancy news with Daniel. He was making coffee, the kitchen filled with the rich scent of beans and cinnamon. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, catching the dust in golden streaks. I had been keeping this secret for weeks, waiting for the right moment, imagining his face when he saw the test, and now I was finally ready. "Daniel," I said softly, holding the small, crumpled test between my fingers. He looked up, tired-eyed, and I saw the faint smile tug at the corners of his lips. I have something to tell you." He set the mug down and gave me his full attention, which felt like a warm blanket around my nervousness.
"I'm pregnant," he whispered.
The moment hung in the air for a heartbeat too long. Then his face transformed, confusion melted into astonishment, and astonishment softened into pure, unguarded joy. "Pregnant," he repeated, almost laughing, almost crying, his hands trembling as they found mine. "Are you serious?" "Twins." I nodded, laughing through tears, and we hugged until the world outside our little kitchen disappeared. For a few hours, nothing existed except that small, shared miracle, that promise of new life. Days passed, and I started sharing the news with close friends, but mostly I wanted to bask in this bubble of happiness with Daniel. We picked names, talked about the nursery, and imagined our two little lives dancing around our home. Everything felt perfect. Everything felt right. Then, on a quiet Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from social media. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was just another meme or work email. But as I scrolled, my stomach dropped. There it was, the ultrasound photo. The exact same image from my doctor's office, crisp and clear. But it wasn't from me. It was from Margaret, my mother-in-law. And under the photo was a caption I will never forget. "Excited to welcome my granddaughter, Lily, soon." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. The room suddenly felt cold, and the sunlight that had been so warm and inviting seemed to mock me. Lily? That wasn't our chosen name. That wasn't my baby. That wasn't my joy. I tried to call Daniel immediately. My voice, when he answered, quivered despite my best effort to stay calm. "Daniel, did you see this?" I asked, pointing at the phone as though he could see it through the line. He laughed nervously, a little too quickly. "Oh, that? Mom she got excited, I guess. She's probably just sharing, you know?" "Sharing?" My voice caught in my throat. "She didn't just share, Daniel. She posted our ultrasound and claimed it was hers. She called it Lily." There was silence on the other end, a pause so long it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. Finally, he said, "Emily, I don't know. I'll talk to her. Let me handle it. But handling it wasn't enough. Nothing could undo the shock, the betrayal I felt. My mother-in-law had stolen the moment that belonged to me and twisted it into something unrecognizable. That small image, meant to be a memory between Daniel and me, had become public property in her hands. Before I could even gather my thoughts, friends and distant relatives started messaging me. Some congratulated Margaret, some confusedly asked if I was announcing a second baby. The lines between truth and falsehood blurred so quickly that I felt dizzy. I realized, in that instant, that what I thought would be a shared celebration had become a stage for secrets, power, and control. And I had no idea how deep it would go. Life before the ultrasound debacle had been ordinary, in the best sense of the word. Daniel and I had our little routines that felt comforting, almost sacred. Saturday mornings meant pancakes and laughter in the kitchen, our dog, Buster, darting between our legs, begging for scraps. Evenings were reserved for quiet walks in the neighborhood or curled up on the couch with old movies and blankets that smelled faintly of lavender from my mother's dried sachets. Daniel was meticulous in a way I had always adored. He noticed the small things. When I burned the toast, when my hair caught in the wind, when a song on the radio made me pause with a wistful look. He had a patience that balanced my anxious energy, a steadiness that made the world feel safe. And in those months before I told him about the twins, I had truly believed that nothing could disturb our little bubble. Margaret, however, always hovered just outside that bubble, smiling, helpful, motherly, but never just quietly loving. There was always a reason behind her kindness, an expectation behind her hugs. She had a way of weaving herself into moments that didn't belong to her, making small decisions on our behalf without asking, and presenting them later as though she had merely been helpful. At first, I didn't mind. After all, mothers have instincts. They worry, they offer guidance. But as I learned that week, instincts could be twisted into something far more sinister. Claire, Daniel's younger sister, was another story entirely. Sweet, bubbly, and a little naive, she often seemed caught between my world and her mother's influence. She adored Daniel and me, and I liked to think she was genuinely on our side. But family loyalty is rarely simple, and even Claire's smiles sometimes carried an undertone of compliance, a hesitancy to challenge Margaret even when she knew something was off. I started noticing little things after that Thursday post. Margaret called constantly, sometimes under the guise of checking in on me, sometimes casually dropping by with cookies or flowers. Each visit left me with the faintest sense of unease, as if the warmth she exuded was only skin deep. The air in our house, once calm, began to feel heavy. I could almost sense the clock ticking, reminding me that she was always watching, always inserting herself into our lives. One evening, Daniel and I sat on the couch, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. I tried to bring up Margaret's post again, though my words felt fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. "Daniel, about your mom?" I began, unsure. He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous gesture I knew well. "Emily, I know. I told her not to, she gets carried away sometimes. You know how she is." "I do, but it's not just that. She posted our ultrasound, claimed it as hers. She named the baby without asking us." My voice shook despite my attempt to sound calm. He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I'll talk to her again. She doesn't mean any harm. She just wants to be part of it." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to lean back into the comfort of our life before the storm. But something inside me whispered that this wasn't just about excitement. This was about control. The days that followed were a careful balancing act. I had to appear calm, normal, and joyful while under the constant scrutiny of Margaret's presence, Whether through phone calls, surprise visits, or social media updates, she seemed to know would reach me. Every time I picked up my phone, I felt that familiar twinge of anxiety. Would there be another post? Another claim? Another name stolen? It wasn't just the social media posts that disturbed me. Small details began to unsettle me. Margaret would comment casually about baby clothes, subtly suggesting brands and styles that Daniel and I hadn't chosen. She mentioned ideas for the nursery and how it should look. At first, I smiled politely, thinking I was overreacting. But soon, I realized that every suggestion was a tiny encroachment on what should have been our private joy. Then came the first small confrontation. Daniel and I were in the nursery, measuring the walls and placing little toys, when Margaret arrived unannounced. "Oh, I thought I'd help," she said brightly, stepping into the room with a basket of baby blankets. "I brought some things for Lily. She's going to love them." I froze, my hands tightening around a tape measure. "Lily," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Lily," she chirped, setting the blankets on the changing table. "Isn't it a beautiful name?" I thought it suited her perfectly. Daniel opened his mouth, hesitated, and looked at me. I shook my head slightly, signaling him to stay calm. But inside, my chest felt like it had been struck. This wasn't just meddling anymore. This was a deliberate, public claim on something that belonged only to Daniel and me. "We haven't decided on a name yet," I said softly, trying not to let anger seep into my tone. Margaret smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, of course, dear. I just thought, since I've been thinking about it, you might like some ideas. You know, something special. Something from the heart." I wanted to scream, to demand that she leave, to tell her that this wasn't her place. But instead, I swallowed my words and nodded politely, my heart sinking. That night, as I lay awake in our dark bedroom, I realized that the real battle wasn't about the name or even the ultrasound. It was about ownership, about who got to claim the joy of life before it even arrived. And I knew, with a quiet, terrifying certainty, that Margaret would not let go easily. After Margaret's nursery visit, I began noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. Small, almost invisible details that gnawed at me in the quiet moments. A subtle shift in Daniel's tone when talking about his mother. The way Claire's laughter seemed forced whenever Margaret was around. The lingering smell of Margaret's perfume in rooms I was sure she hadn't entered. It was as if she had extended her presence beyond her visits, leaving invisible footprints in our home and our lives. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe pregnancy has made me sensitive to everything. But the unease didn't go away. It grew in quiet, insidious waves, tugging at the corners of my mind. Every time I scrolled social media, my chest tightened. Margaret's posts weren't just harmless updates. They were carefully curated snapshots of a life that wasn't hers to claim. Each photo of Lily seemed timed to remind the world, and perhaps Daniel and me, that she had taken ownership of our miracle. The first real clue came unexpectedly. I was organizing some baby clothes in the nursery one afternoon, arranging tiny socks and soft onesies, when I noticed a small, folded envelope tucked between the mattress and the crib. It wasn't there before, I was certain of it. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, Margaret's. Inside was a note, short and neatly written. "I hope you don't mind, but I've made a little album for Lily. She will love seeing herself already surrounded by love. You'll see, it's perfect." I felt the air leave my lungs. An album? Without asking me? Without even acknowledging that it was my baby? I stared at the envelope, shaking, and then at the crib. It was as if she had already staked a claim on the life growing inside me, erasing me from the story before it even began. When Daniel came home that evening, I confronted him gently, trying to keep my voice steady. "Daniel, there's a note from your mom," I said, placing the envelope in his hands. He opened it, glanced at the handwriting, and then looked at me, a mixture of frustration and helplessness in his eyes. "Emily," I told her not to, but she gets excited. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I replied, my voice low, but firm. "She's trying to take this from me, Daniel. She's trying to make this baby hers before it's even born." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing the living room. "I'll talk to her again. I promise." I didn't think she would go this far. "I don't know if talking is enough anymore," I said, my heart aching. "I can feel it, Daniel. She's manipulating everyone around us. Claire, even you sometimes. She knows exactly what to say to make us hesitate, to make us doubt ourselves." He stopped, looking at me with a mixture of guilt and confusion. "Emily, I never wanted this to happen. I thought she was just trying to help." "But helping is different from claiming," I said softly. "You have to see that." That night, I lay in bed, the soft hum of the ceiling fan above me, trying to make sense of everything. Every memory of Margaret's past helpfulness now felt tinged with intention. She had always wanted control. I always wanted to be the center, even when it meant stepping over boundaries. And now, with the twins, she has found her ultimate opportunity. The following week, subtle signs of her interference multiplied. She called repeatedly, each conversation framed as concern. "Are you resting enough, Emily?" Or, "I found a great pediatrician who's perfect for Lily. You'll love her." On social media, she posted vague, affectionate updates. "Can't wait to meet my sweet girl," accompanied by hearts and baby emojis. Each post was a calculated reminder that she was already inserting herself into our baby's life. Then came the first direct confrontation, although not with words. I noticed it when a package arrived at our door. I had ordered a set of tiny, handcrafted baby clothes for the twins. Inside, instead of what I had chosen, were personalized outfits embroidered with the name Lily and notes from Margaret praising how thoughtful she was to prepare them for her granddaughter. I held the tiny clothes in my hands, disbelief and fury twisting together in a knot in my stomach. She hadn't just claimed our baby's name publicly. She had begun shaping the reality of our children before they even existed, attempting to override our choices with her own vision. Daniel came home later that day, and I laid the items on the kitchen counter. "Look at this," I said, my voice trembling. "She's doing this intentionally. She's not just excited. She's trying to replace me in our baby's life." He looked at the outfits, his face pale. "Emily, I didn't think it would escalate like this. I thought I could manage her." "You can't manage her," I said firmly, my hands clenched into fists. "She's controlling everything before the babies even arrive. If we don't act, Daniel, we might lose them to her manipulation. And I won't let that happen." The tension between us hung in the room, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just Margaret anymore. It was the ripple of her actions infiltrating every aspect of our lives. And in that moment, I realized that I couldn't wait for her to make the next move. I had to start paying attention, observing, and preparing for what was coming. Something inside me shifted that night. A quiet determination settled over my fear. Margaret had crossed a line, and now it was clear that the peaceful, ordinary life I had known was over. What lay ahead would test everything: our marriage, our family bonds, and my own strength. But I refused to let her rewrite our story, not without a fight. The first clue had been small, almost invisible: a note, a package, a name stolen, but it had opened a door. Behind it was a world I wasn't ready to face yet, filled with secrets, manipulation, and betrayal. And as I lay in bed, my hands on my growing belly, I whispered softly to the twins, "Mommy will protect you, no matter what." The moment of betrayal didn't arrive with fanfare. It was quiet, subtle, like a shadow creeping across the floor. But when it landed, it struck harder than anything I could have imagined. It started with a phone call from Claire. I was folding laundry in the nursery, the smell of baby detergent and soft blankets filling the air, when my phone buzzed. Claire's voice was hesitant, almost trembling. "Emily, I think you need to see this," she said, her words clipped and rushed. "See what?" I asked, a sense of dread settling in my chest. It's Mom. I didn't want to believe it either, but you should come by." Something in her tone made my heart seize. I told Daniel what was happening, and we drove to Margaret's house together, the car filled with tense silence. Buster whimpered from the back seat, sensing my anxiety, one trembling with fury and heartbreak. "These are my babies, Daniel and I's children. You don't get to decide who they are before they even arrive." 11. Margaret's smile didn't falter. "You're too sensitive. I'm only thinking of them. They'll thank me one day." I couldn't breathe. The betrayal wasn't just about a stolen name or a photo anymore. It was about control, manipulation, and the audacity of someone believing they could overwrite my life, my choices, and my family. I realized then that Margaret's interference had been years in the making. Every subtle push, every carefully placed comment, every act of helpfulness had been a calculated effort to dominate, to shape the narrative, and now it was all laid bare. Daniel finally stepped forward, placing a tentative hand on my shoulder. "Emily, we can fix this," he said softly. "We'll set boundaries. I'll talk to her. I swear, I'll protect you and the babies." I looked at him, tears blurring my vision. "I hope so, Daniel. I really do. But it feels like too much sometimes. Like we're already fighting a war before our children are even born." Margaret, sensing that her web was unraveling, tried one last tactic. "You're being dramatic, Emily. Think of the family. I always wanted to be the center, even W. I'm only trying to unite everyone." I stepped back, my heart pounding.
No, Margaret.
"You're trying to control everything. And I won't let you. Not my babies. Not my life." That night, I lay in bed, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. I couldn't stop replaying the photos, the messages, the lies she had spun. The reality was unbearable. Margaret had infiltrated our lives so deeply that I couldn't even trust that our private moments were truly ours anymore. But in that dark, sleepless night, a spark of clarity emerged. I realized that I had a choice. I could let this manipulation continue, allow Margaret to claim what was rightfully ours, or I could act. I had to protect my babies. I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. Confronting Margaret would be uncomfortable, messy, and possibly explosive. But the alternative, silence, was unacceptable. The first step was setting boundaries. I made it clear to Daniel that I would not allow unannounced visits, unsolicited packages, or social media posts claiming our twins as hers. Together, we drafted a plan. Any communication from Margaret that crossed a line would be documented, any gifts would be returned unopened, and any public claims would be addressed immediately. When I first confronted Margaret with the rules, I could see her surprise. She had always assumed that her influence was untouchable, that the subtle manipulations she had woven into our lives would continue unchecked. "Margaret," I said, holding my phone with evidence in hand, "these are the posts, the messages, and the packages. I love that you're excited, but this is my family, my babies, and my life. You cannot claim them as your own." She smiled, but it was thin, sharp, defensive. Emily, you're being harsh. I only want what's best. I've been part of this family longer than anyone, and I only wish to help. No, I said firmly. Helping is respecting boundaries. You've crossed the line. This ends now. Meanwhile, Margaret began trying to repair her image subtly, softening her tone in conversations and online posts. But the truth had already been exposed, and for the first time, she faced consequences, not from me, but from the people who had been quietly observing, questioning, and now realizing her manipulations. I also took control of social media. I posted our ultrasound photo, this time with our chosen names, and shared a heartfelt message about our twins. The joy was ours to celebrate, and I refused to let it be stolen again. Comments poured in from friends and family, congratulating us, offering support, and validating the boundaries we had established. The sense of reclaiming our life was empowering. For weeks, we maintained our distance from Margaret while still trying to navigate family events with grace. Each day, the twins grew inside me, a reminder of why the fight was worth it. Their tiny kicks, their subtle movements, their presence, it was sacred, untouchable, and ours alone. I also noticed a change in Daniel. He became more assertive, more willing to stand beside me publicly, and more aware of how his family's dynamics had influenced our lives. Together, we felt a new sense of unity, a team ready to protect our children from anyone who sought to manipulate or control them. It wasn't easy. Margaret tried subtle tactics, comments, friendly suggestions, or even feigned concern. But every time, I reminded myself of the boundaries, of the evidence, and of the fact that this was no longer just about my discomfort. It was about protecting our family and our twins. One afternoon, as I was organizing the nursery, I realized something. The fear and anxiety that had once consumed me were replaced by a quiet confidence. Margaret's interference, while painful, had revealed a strength I didn't know I possessed. I could confront betrayal, reclaim my joy, and set limits without losing my dignity. I could protect my children and my family while remaining calm, composed, and loving. The reaction phase was challenging, emotionally exhausting, and often painful. But it was necessary. It reminded me that boundaries are not just rules. They are a form of love, protection, and respect for oneself and one's family. And through this process, Daniel and I discovered a renewed sense of partnership, a deeper understanding of each other, and a shared determination to keep our children safe from manipulation and control. By the end of this phase, Margaret had begun to retreat. Her posts became sparse, her messages less intrusive, and her presence at family gatherings more respectful, though still tinged with a quiet tension. The shift was subtle but noticeable. Our family was beginning to reclaim the space that had been disrupted by her actions. And I realized, for the first time since discovering her betrayal, that victory wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about setting boundaries, reclaiming joy, and protecting what truly mattered: my twins, my marriage, and my sense of self. Once I had taken a firm stand, it wasn't long before the ripple effect began to show. Margaret, who had spent so many years quietly influencing family perceptions, was suddenly under scrutiny. Friends, relatives, and even neighbors who had long admired her kindness began to notice cracks in the carefully polished facade. It started subtly, with family members questioning some of her stories, realizing that details didn't match up, that her intentions weren't always pure. Aunt Karen, who had once thought Margaret's actions harmless, pulled me aside one afternoon. "Emily," she said, her voice gentle but serious, "I didn't realize. I see it now. Those posts, the gifts, claiming the baby, it wasn't just excitement. She was controlling. You were right. Hearing those words brought a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief because I was finally understood, but sorrow because it confirmed how long Margaret had manipulated everyone around her. It wasn't just my family. She had been quietly twisting perceptions for years. The more I shared evidence, the more it became clear that Margaret's behavior had reached a tipping point. Friends who had once praised her dedication to family were shocked to see how far she had overstepped. Even some of Daniel's colleagues, who had received carefully curated messages from her, began to realize the truth. Then came the first major confrontation at a family gathering. Margaret had attempted to appear normal, offering polite smiles and soft-spoken comments. But I noticed subtle whispers among relatives, questioning her motives, and seeing the stark contrast between her words and her past actions. I approached her quietly during a lull in conversation. "Margaret," I said softly but firmly, "the truth is out. Everyone knows what you've done. Your attempts to control our family, to claim our twins, are no longer hidden. You need to understand that actions have consequences." She looked at me, a flash of surprise crossing her face. For the first time, she seemed uncertain, unsure of how to respond. "Emily, that's unfair. I only wanted to help." "No," I interrupted gently. "Help doesn't look like claiming my babies, sending unsolicited gifts, or rewriting our story.
People see that now.
It's not about anger. It's about respect, boundaries, and honesty." By the end of that gathering, Margaret's influence had begun to crumble. People spoke directly to me, offering validation, support, and sometimes cautious apologies for having doubted my perspective in the past. I realized that the public acknowledgement of the truth was as important as the private confrontation. The more her actions were exposed, the less control she could exert. Even Daniel noticed the change. He came home that evening, exhausted but calm. "Emily, it's done," he said quietly. "People understand. Mom, she's realizing she can't manipulate anymore." I nodded, relief flooding through me. But it wasn't about celebrating her defeat. It was about reclaiming our family, our joy, and our twins' future. I had learned something vital. When manipulation is exposed with calm, evidence-backed action, it loses its power. Margaret, of course, didn't disappear entirely. She still tried small tactics, occasionally sending messages or subtly inserting herself into conversations.
But now,
with eyes on her and boundaries firmly in place, her attempts were weak, ineffective, and transparent. The social consequence was profound. Relatives who had once feared questioning her now spoke openly. Friends who had accepted her narrative began to see reality. Even distant family members who had admired her social media posts realized the careful construction of her public persona had been a veneer, concealing a more controlling, invasive side. Through this process, Daniel and I learned how to navigate family dynamics with honesty, clarity, and courage. We discovered that protecting our children didn't mean isolating ourselves, but rather asserting boundaries, being transparent with those around us, and trusting our instincts. At the same time, the twins' impending arrival became a source of immense joy. Every kick, every flutter reminded me why the fight had been worth it. This wasn't just about asserting control over Margaret. It was about establishing a safe, loving environment for the little lives growing inside me. I also began to notice subtle changes in Margaret. Her once confident and manipulative demeanor softened, replaced with a quieter, more subdued presence. While she never fully admitted wrongdoing, the weight of social and familial awareness had a visible impact. She began to retreat, no longer attempting to dominate our lives, but observing from a distance. It was a strange, bittersweet victory. I didn't feel triumphant in a celebratory sense. I felt a quiet, resolute peace. The public consequences of her actions were not about revenge. They were about justice, clarity, and reclaiming the narrative for our family. By the time I reached the final weeks of pregnancy, Margaret's attempts to interfere had nearly ceased. Family gatherings, once fraught with tension and subtle manipulation, became calmer, structured around respect and clear boundaries. I realized that exposing the truth publicly had done more than stop her. It had rebuilt the foundation of trust and understanding with those around us. And most importantly, it reminded me that as a mother, I was not powerless. I had agency. I had a voice. I had the ability to protect my children, even in the face of someone as controlling and clever as Margaret. The public consequences of her manipulation were not just her lesson. They were a collective realization that family loyalty does not excuse overreach, that love does not justify control, and that the bonds between parents and children are sacred, inviolable, and non-negotiable. The weeks passed slowly, but with a sense of quiet healing. The storm of betrayal, manipulation, and family tension had finally begun to settle, leaving a clearer, calmer space in which Daniel and I could breathe and plan for the arrival of our twins. Our home, once filled with unease and tension, began to feel warm and inviting again. The nursery was completed, each detail chosen carefully by us. Soft cream walls, tiny wooden shelves filled with plush toys, and 2 cribs side by side, waiting for our little ones. Every morning, as sunlight filtered through the curtains, I would stand in that room, hand on my belly, and feel a flutter of anticipation. These were my babies, and the joy of knowing we had reclaimed this space from Margaret's interference made it all the more precious. Daniel and I spent our evenings talking about the future, imagining milestones that were ours alone. Names we had chosen in secret now had a home in our hearts and in our nursery. Emma and Noah. Every time I whispered them aloud, I felt a sense of ownership and pride.
No one could steal that.
The process of healing was more than physical preparation. It was emotional. I sought moments of calm, meditating in the evenings, journaling my thoughts, and speaking openly with friends who had supported me throughout the ordeal. I realized that setting boundaries and confronting betrayal had strengthened me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had reclaimed not just my family, but my sense of self. Margaret's presence had diminished significantly. She called less, visited less, and her attempts at subtle manipulation had faded into awkward politeness. While she remained a part of our lives, she no longer held the power to unsettle us. I had learned to assert myself, to calmly stand firm, and to trust my instincts, a lesson I knew would carry beyond motherhood. Even Daniel changed during this time. He became more assertive in his own right, more protective of our space, and more aware of the ways in which family dynamics could shape and sometimes threaten our lives. Together, we felt stronger, a united front, ready to embrace the joys and challenges of parenthood. As the weeks wore on, I began to notice a shift inside myself as well. The anxiety and anger that had once dominated my thoughts softened into a quiet strength. I was no longer living in the shadow of betrayal, but moving forward with intention, love, and clarity. Every kick from Emma and Noah reminded me of the life we had fought to protect, a life that belonged to us, untainted by manipulation or control. One evening, I sat on the couch with Daniel, the house quiet except for the hum of the fan and the soft rustle of leaves outside. I traced the outline of my belly with my fingers and whispered, "We did it, little ones. Mommy and Daddy protected you. You're safe." He took my hand, squeezing gently. "You were amazing, Emily. You protected our family, and you kept our babies safe. I'm so proud of you." I smiled, letting the warmth of his words sink in. It wasn't just me. We did it together. And we'll continue to do it for them, for us. As the due date approached, the sense of anticipation grew, mingled with calm confidence. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and the subtle threat of losing control over my own life, and I had emerged stronger. The healing process wasn't just about reclaiming our family. It was about recognizing my own resilience, my ability to act decisively, and my capacity to protect those I loved most. On the day the twins arrived, the hospital room was filled with quiet joy. Daniel held my hand, our hearts beating in sync as we welcomed Emma and Noah into the world. Their tiny fingers grasped ours, their first cries ringing like music. In that moment, all the tension, betrayal, and struggle fell away, replaced with a profound sense of love and completion. The months that followed were a continuation of the healing process. I cherished every moment, from late-night feedings to soft lullabies, each experience a reminder of the life we had reclaimed and the family we had fought to protect. Margaret, while present, had accepted her role as a distant observer rather than a controlling influence. Boundaries had been established, respect had been restored, and our home was once again a sanctuary. I often reflected on the lessons learned during those months of turmoil. Life would always present challenges, and not everyone in our families or communities would act with honesty or respect. But the power to set boundaries, to assert oneself, and to protect what is sacred is invaluable. Betrayal, while painful, can be a catalyst for strength, clarity, and renewed love. By the time I settled into the rhythm of motherhood, I felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. The twins thrived, Daniel and I grew closer, and our home, once disrupted by manipulation, became a place of laughter, love, and safety. I had learned to trust myself, to act decisively, and to create a protective space for my family, lessons that would guide me for years to come. And in those quiet moments, as I watched Emma and Noah sleep side by side, I whispered a promise to them. No one would ever take away their joy, their names, or the love that surrounded them. They were ours, and I would protect them with every fiber of my being. Sitting here now, with Emma and Noah asleep in the next room, I can finally breathe. The chaos, the betrayal, the constant tension, it all feels like a distant storm. But the lessons it left behind are clear, and I want to share them with you. Family can be complicated. Sometimes, the people we love most can hurt us, whether intentionally or without even realizing the impact of their actions. Boundaries are not selfish. They are a form of love. Protecting your family, your joy, and your choices is not just necessary. It's your right. I learned that confronting betrayal doesn't have to be loud or vindictive. Calmly documenting the truth, standing firm in your convictions, and seeking support can change the course of what feels like an impossible situation. It's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming your life, your family, and your peace. Watching my twins sleep now, I am reminded that life is fragile, precious, and worth protecting. They will grow up in a home built on love, honesty, and respect, not fear or manipulation. And that is something no one can ever take away. So, I ask you, dear listener, have you ever had to fight for your family or protect what's yours from someone who tried to control it? How did you handle it? Share your story with me in the comments. I truly want to know. And one more thing. Where are you listening from? Which city are you joining me from today? Tell me in the comments. If my story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe so we can continue exploring the real, emotional stories that shape our lives. Remember, even in the face of betrayal or manipulation, your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and your love can always protect what's most precious.